I've gotten a lot of YouTube comments all telling me all about virtualization, specifically Linux virtualization. I don't know what this means. I'm going to pretend it's how do I run virtual machines on my Linux machine. Uh, well, I'm happy to say for decades this has been remarkably easy to do. There's just many different ways of going about it, but I'm going to focus on the best way in particular. I think everyone can agree this is objectively the easiest and most performant way to do so, all right? And it's Virt-Manager. Virtual machines are all about having a separate computer that pulls resources from your real machine. Really, a best way to think about it is think of it like as a computer within your computer. I think that's the best way to explain a virtual machine to someone. And there are many types of virtual machine software. So like everyone knows things like VirtualBox and VMware Workstation and Parallels. There's all sorts of them. But today I want to focus on Virt-Manager for one key reason. Virt-Manager is not only free, but probably the better performing out of all of them, at least for Linux users. Anyone who's tried to use a VirtualBox knows you have to install the guest edition CD just to get like copy paste to work in your virtual machine properly. And then VMware wants you to, in Parallels, wants you to cough up money just to do basic things with their program.
No. Parallels want you to cough up money on a subscription basis, so they're even better.
Stop it. Get some help.
And then Virt-Manager has direct, unlike all these other programs, has direct integration into the Linux kernel. Yes, they're that special. Virt-Manager is backed by Red Hat, everyone's favorite Linux corporate entity. And they actually have a full guide on their website explaining in detail how to run and use Virt-Manager and virtualize Linux distributions on Red Hat server. So anyone who uses stuff like Red Hat server or whatever, you probably know this better than I do. Virt-Manager is essentially a front end for all the command line stuff that you would do if you were using it on a server, right? So it's primarily targeted, I would say, towards desktop users, right? Because if you, let's say you have an internal Spice server and you're trying to, and Spice server, which is the server which you use to connect everything, you can connect local IP addresses to your server. You just need to configure them, right? And that's, you know, that's the big hump that Virt-Manager has to overcome, or all the configuring them. But once you get going, using Virt-Manager, especially if you're on like a Debian-based system, is remarkably easy. Like there's very little upkeep. You don't have to do anything crazy. You just, and then if you're on another distro, that you might have to put in some extra work, right? So if you're using anything other than Debian or Ubuntu, you might have to put in a little extra work, and that's partially because a lot of other package managers don't configure these things to give the end user, who's probably a developer who knows what they're doing, a little more freedom to do what they want with their server, right? So, for example, I'm going to use this guide, right? Because this Fedora guide actually helps a lot. If you ever have issues, come back to this Fedora guide. There's a link in the description. Go follow it. This one guide tells you practically everything you need to know about how everything works and what to do if you're having problems. So, for example, on Red Hat distros, there's actually a group list for it. It's sudo dnf install @virtualization, and then you just do that and it will magically install everything that you need. This thing, ignore this. You might only need to do this if you're using Fedora server, but if you're using desktop Linux, you never have to do this. I've never had to touch this at all. And then you need to start and enable the service. If you're on Debian, this is done for you by apt. But if you're using another distro, you're going to have to do this yourself. So if you're using Fedora or Arch Linux or SUSE, you're going to have to do this yourself. Now, then add your user to the group. This is to the libvirt group. Make sure you're in the libvirt group. And then once you do all of that, you need to log out and log back in again, and then you can get going, right? So what do you do? So, you know, do everything you need to do in your terminal, get everything you need, and then go, right? And then what you can do is, once you do that, you can just open Virt-Manager like you would. So like if you have like, you know, your start menu or whatever, go click on that, you'll get there, right? They make an icon for you, right? And this is behold this is all the virtual machines I have. I actually have a lot. Probably have more than normal people. And it's not because of YouTube or anything. I just have them because I have them, okay? I like to have every like major operating system at my disposal, within reason, of course.
It's like fine wine. You need to have every tasting of fine wine in your cellar.
The real benefit of Virt-Manager is this UI here has not changed in a million years. So you can use this and it's going to function exactly the same as it does across every Linux, no matter what Linux distro you're using, right? So how do you get started, right? So pretend all of these aren't here, right? Let's ignore all of these. What do you do? What do you do if you don't have any virtual machines installed?
My guess is press the plus button.
Exactly. So you press the plus button, and
Hey,
then
look, I'm helping.
and then this window will pop up, and you're presented with a bunch of options. So, for example, you can do local install. So this is if you have an ISO image or a DVD, but you also have network install. So if you know, something like Arch Linux or Gen 2 support network installs, right? You can use this to actually do a network install of distro of your choice. You can also import disk images, right? So if you have like
An IMG file, is it IMG? Yeah.
Well, there's IMG files, but there's also things like, for example, I might cover this in the future. The Linux distribution Hunix will actually distribute to you. Maintainers will actually provide you a raw QEMU image for you to install yourself. And they actually have a full guide on various Linux distros on how to install and how to apply their QEMU image into your distro. It's actually pretty comprehensive. So if you want more resources on how, if you really want more resources, if all this other stuff didn't help you, the Hunix wiki actually has a really great guide on how to go through all of this. So if I'll hop back to the virtual machine here. So I'm just going to go off of ISO images because I assume that's how most people get their Linux ISOs, you know. You can always you always have your own way to get your Linux ISOs.
I don't know
right?
about you, but I'm always torrenting my Linux ISOs.
By default, what they do here is they actually have a pool, and this is where this default pool is where all of your virtual machine images are stored. So by default, it's /var/lib/libvirt/images, and that's where they dump all of your images, right? So what you might need to do is you might need to add a pool, right? And a pool is where to protect the security model of your system, you're not allowed to add other folders in here, which are not allowed to touch your virtual machines. This is done for your protection, okay? Especially for people who run servers. What if there's a virus that could possibly try to use this to escape because they're using a server with a GUI? These pools are created so that they use Spice, the Spice protocol, to transfer files to the virtual machine system so that everything is done securely.
Across the galaxy.
Right? So
using space aliens.
Like what we did earlier, what's the first thing you do? You hit the plus button, right? And then what you can do here is you can name it whatever you want, and then you can add in the folder of your choice. This can even be a folder that you just dump all of your ISO images in, right? And then you just click finish. And that's actually what I did. So this pool right here, I just named it pool. I'm uncreative. But you can see here, I actually have various other Linux distributions installed.
You do actually legitimately have a lot of ISOs.
Oh, these are all checksums. Ignore those.
Oh, those. Okay.
But so let's pick something here, right? So for example, let's say I wanted to install, I don't know, the latest version of Ubuntu. What am I saying? The latest version of Fedora XFCE, because this is a common build that I use for a lot of my virtual machines, right? And because this is in a folder, so you can see this is in my home folder, and it's in the ISOs folder, right? So this is the one that I'm going to use. Just click on it, and then click choose volume. What it will try to do is, you'll see here, it tries to guess what distro you're using. You don't have to actually be precise here, but and if it doesn't detect it, like it didn't here, you'll notice it didn't even detect it here. So if you just type in like Fedora, you'll see here Fedora 36. I think this is the correct one. So you just click on that. You can click on whatever you want, but like if you want the best experience, this just helps picking good defaults for your configuration, right? So it's best you be accurate with this as much as you can. So just click next. And then you can see here, you can choose how much RAM you want to allocate and how much CPU cores you want to allocate. Because I'm recording, I don't want to dedicate a lot of CPU cores, but because I'm extra and special, I'm going to give it 8 gigs of RAM because I'm special that way.
Because you have that RAM to spare.
And then you can create a special disk size. So the default for Fedora is 20 gigabytes, but if you want to add more, feel free to add more. And these is up to your discretion. You can also choose to have it store again in a pool, the pool of your choosing. So if you want to store all of your libvirt images in your home folder, feel free to do that. But I just use the default location. Some people prefer to do this because it's in their home directory and it's easier to interface with. You can't actually run any commands in this directory, right? Which is, again, for your own protection. There's a reason why they don't do it. You don't want to give an attacker complete access to your root directory. That would be awful. Well, so let me show you what this actually looks like, right? So I'm just going to zoom into this terminal here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you what happens if you, what libvirt tries to do to protect you, right? So what you need to do is if you do ls, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do /var/lib/libvirt. And then you'll notice when I do images, right? And if I press this, notice this. It says ls cannot open directory, permission denied. And it's because I am doing this as my standard user. I am not doing this as my root user. Virt-Manager is trying to protect you. So this is one of the reasons why you can't do this. I understand if you want to do whatever you want, but understand this is why you use the default folder.
So what are the permission levels for that directory?
It's for the libvirt user only, right? And the root user, right?
Okay.
So that's for your own protection. So if something bad, in case something bad happens. And then you can see here, you can enter the name. So I'm just going to say, let's call this YouTube. Make it easy. And then you can configure your customization before it's done. I actually recommend this. There's a lot of inoptimal things at the beginning. So let me give a quick rundown of some of this. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'm just going to try to explain how this works, all right? So the first thing that I would do is, notice here, if you go to CPUs, don't copy your whole CPU configuration, all right? This is partially to help make the virtualization process smoother. And this is more true of Linux than it is of Windows. So like, but if you're on Windows, you're trying to emulate Windows through QEMU, you might want to still do this, right? So what I always do is I always change this to do host pass-through. That way, it's not directly pulling your CPU, right? This is just something I do, right? I don't know why I do.
So what does host pass-through do?
I actually don't remember.
It passes through the host.
It just passes through the host. If you do host model, it just tries to clone your host model, but it doesn't actually like use it per se. It's not really complete. So that's why I do host pass-through, right? Second thing you can do is memory. So if you change your mind of the RAM allocation you did earlier, you can see I have 32 gigs of RAM, and you can just give it whatever the heck you want. And then here's this thing for a tablet. Yes, I don't know why they do this. Virtual input for touchpads. I don't have a touchpad. I'm just going to get rid of this. So this is not going to be checked by default. I recommend everyone go through this. By default, it's probably set to the QXL driver. To maximize your performance, you want the virt.io driver. The virt.io driver is a superior driver, right? And then after that, you're pretty much good to go. You have to click apply. And make sure you apply all your changes. And then click this button right here to begin installation, right? And then what this is going to do is it's going to begin the installation. And you can see here, this is a Fedora install. You can see you can full screen it. So you hover over at the top here. You can see there's this little menu. You can full screen it and unfull screen it. You can also freeze the virtual machine. So that's the pause button. And you can also force it off or reboot it, because sometimes you might need to do this. And then on this little two double screens here, this is for snapshots. And you can use this to save a snapshot of your virtual machine to rewind it back in time, right? So I'll give a demonstration of this, but this is pretty afterwards. So this is pretty much what you'd expect from, your standard virtual machine. This is pretty normal for virtual machines as virtual machines go. You can see it's starting to boot up now. It's probably going to take a little longer than usual.
Because it's only got one core.
It is only one core. And you can see the Fedora logos, which means it's booting up, right?
Why don't you press escape?
What?
I think it's escape. So you can
so
see
if you ever click on it and your mouse gets stuck, so notice how my mouse just disappeared. If this ever happens to you, do Control-Alt-J, and then what that will do is that will free your Control-Alt-J. Do Control-Alt-G, and that will free your mouse. This is I got worried about this really early on, but you need to do the free your mouse. But as you can see, take a look at this. It's a live image, but it's a fully functioning Fedora virtual machine. This is running off of the live image, and it's not.
Oh, and you're using XFCE, okay.
Yeah, this is the XFCE spin. So as you can see,
I mean, I was going to say, I was like,
great.
You don't have desktop icons in Fedora by default?
No, you don't. But as you can see, it's working just fine. So I'm just going to power this off for now, because I think we're done with the... That's just how and then you would just proceed through installing Linux like you normally would, right? I'm just going to force that off here. Right? And that's pretty much about what you'd expect, right? But let me actually show you a template that I actually use, and I might release this in the future. You can see here I've had to update this numerous times. So this is one of my templates, right? So what I recommend doing is, the reason why I have all of these distros here is they're actually all just templates, right? So I just copy them on the fly, and then I can just use them for some disposable, if I want to do some disposable computing or web browsing, or if I want to test out an app that I'm not exactly familiar with. And for all you nerds out there, you can test out the window manager of your choice and not have something go wrong with your main machine when you do it. So you write all of your configs in a virtual machine, and then you transfer them to your real machine, right? That's the smart way of doing it. Don't test it on your main machine. Test it in a virtual machine first, then bring it to your main machine and see what happens. Right?
And that way you don't have to worry about trying to uninstall all kinds of crazy dependencies, because you can just trash the virtual machine.
Right, but let me give you an example here, right? So notice this virtual machine is clean and undone, right? So let me power this off, and I'll show you how snapshots work, right? So if you want to get snapshots to work, right? So if you go to remember, click on this little screen icon, it's the end right here, right? And then what you're going to want to do is you want to click on this plus icon right here, right? At the bottom. And then you'll see it lets you create a snapshot. I'm just going to name this default, right? You'll notice it creates a snapshot. I prefer to do this when it's powered off. Generally, for some reason, and this is not just Virt-Manager, this is every virtual machine software I've used, it always seems like it takes a long time to pull a virtual machine that's actively running, and that's possibly just a limitation of the times. So simply we'll have to live with that. So treat that as that's a blank slate for this virtual machine, right? So let me show what this looks like, right? So this is pretty much what one would expect from a virtual machine, but let's actually show some changes on what this actually might look like and how the snapshot runs. So let me try to do some things in this virtual machine and show what might look like, right? So the first thing that every virtual machine because not all of them install, like Fedora will install this by default, but if you're installing another Linux distro, they're not, or like that isn't Fedora or OpenSUSE, they're not going to do this for you. So you're going to have to know how to do this, right? So you're going to need the package, and it's always this name. This is the same as Arch Linux and Debian and whatever. You're going to need the Spice, if I can actually spell, the Spice-vdagent. Virtual desktop agent. You're going to need this package, right? So if I do sudo dnf install Spice-vdagent, right? Password. And then what this is going to do is, you'll see here, the way I have this configured is it's downloading, it's checking Fedora's repos right now. But you need to make sure you have this package installed. This package essentially allows you to copy and paste from your virtual machine. And the beauty of this is this isn't as convoluted as VMware and VirtualBox's solution. This is just something that universally works across all of Linux. You don't need to install VirtualBox's awful guest editions. You can just copy paste like magic. So let me show what this. Let me try to show what this looks like, right? So I'll open a terminal here because this is how I function, right? And let me just open Vim, right? Actually, let's open this bash script that I've been working on. You probably saw it in my shell. So let's open this bash script that I've been working on, right? And you can see here there's a lot of random my anime list because I'm a nerd. This is what I'm a weeb. This is what I work on, right? So let's say I want to copy a line here. So I'm just going to copy, and I have NeoVim configured so that I copy directly from my clipboard, right? So let me say I just want to copy this line here. This line right here, so I'm just going to copy that line. It's just YY, but it doesn't matter. You can do this with a text editor, browser, doesn't matter. Whatever you copy from, it takes your system clipboard, and this works on both Wayland and Xorg, right? So and then watch this. If I right click and then paste, notice how this HTML code actually gets pasted directly in here, and I click cancel there. But if you actually just want to paste and click paste, boom, you pasted it. Right? Look, you can even notice it got the little Unicode stars. Like, it's actually pretty good. So, like, don't be afraid to take advantage of this. I mean, this technicality, for the paranoid out there, having guest editions does compromise your VM because this potentially allows the virtual machine to essentially detect what's on your clipboard, right? So, but for most people,
you could potentially pass a virus through a clipboard.
Right, but for most use cases, that shouldn't be a concern for people, right? So Having the Spice agent lets you do that. Things like copying and pasting. But here's one of the other cool things. Like VirtualBox and like Virt-Manager, one of the cool things that this does is this lets you transfer files, right? So one of the things here, so let me show you what this looks like. So I have right here, you'll see here in my GUI file manager, I haven't found a way to do this in the command line. I'll find out how someday. But in here I'm using a GUI file manager. You can use whatever GUI file manager you want. This works if you're using Dolphin or Thunar or Nautilus or whatever file manager you use, right? Just make sure it's a GUI file manager, right? What you can do is you can actually drag and drop documents from your computer, no matter what they are, right? So right here, I have Apple's security white paper. They release this like a couple times once or twice a year, am I right? Once or twice a year, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag and drop this into the VM here. You'll see when I hover over it, there's this little plus over my cursor, and then I'm just going to click there. And then you can see here, look at that. The document was magically transported to my computer, right?
That's actually a remarkable amount of integration.
And this is because it has direct integration to the Linux kernel, right? You won't get the same kind of seamless experience that you would get if you were using something like VMware Workstation or VirtualBox, right? And if you're a Linux user and you're using virtual machines, seriously consider Virt-Manager. There's a lot of power it can give you, and it works pretty much identically to what one would expect to running and viewing programs on your computer. Especially for testing out Linux distros, running Windows programs, or there's all sorts of more cool stuff you can do that I don't have the money or resources to do, like GPU pass through, running whatever. There's all sorts of cool, great things you can do, and it really does put a lot of these other programs to shame, especially on Linux. QEMU probably is the gold standard, and what better way to use it than use something like Virt-Manager to actually take advantage of all of these things, right? And you can see here another thing that I didn't notice, but I think some people might have noticed. Notice how the cursor between my virtual machine and my desktop here is seamless, right? That's another nice little tweak that Virt-Manager's Spice agent, the Spice protocol, does for you, right? The seamless mouse and clicking animation that you get when you move between your host machine and your virtual machine, right? But notice here, so let's top it off. Let's show the snapshot in action, right? So I'm going to turn off the virtual machine here, right? And remember, I pasted in that Apple PDF onto my desktop, right? So let's roll back the snapshot, right? So I'm going to click on the snapshot that I created just now, right? And then I'm going to click on this play button right here, right? And what this play button is going to do is it's going to say, are you sure you're going to run this snapshot? But this is going to do it. So basically what it's going to do is anything that was dumped on here is going to basically be removed and blasted off of my computer, and is going to be replaced with how this virtual machine was before I made all of those changes, right? So I'm just going to say yes, and you'll see a little loading menu here. And what that's going to do is that's actually going to replace the current snapshot, right? So to test and see if this works, right, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to first boot up the virtual machine. And you'll see here it looks, it looks about the same so far, right? But then, once you boot up, the moment of truth. Once I boot up into the desktop, I should not see the Apple PDF. And lo and behold, here we are at the desktop, and there's no Apple PDF, which proves that the snapshotting did its work.
So what if you wanted to at least temporarily save changes to a snapshot? Is it possible to do that?
Yeah, you would have to overwrite the snapshot, right? So, you can just make multiple snapshots too, but you can't really overwrite them. You would have to just create another one, right? So you can and this is, you're kind of limited this way in the other one. So you can see here I have a snapshot that's currently running one, right? And you could just create that, and this would be a new blank slate for you to build
if
from.
you were doing something to the Apple PDF, and you had to, go off to work or something, so you wanted to shut down your computer, so you wanted to suspend the current situation that you had going on, you would create a new
Yeah,
snapshot
so like this, right?
and then
Because this is essentially suspending my session, right? I
by
run the
creating a
snapshot,
new duplicate of what is currently there.
right? And then I would run the snapshot and then would reopen the running VM with this state, right?
Okay.
And this is true of all other virtual machines. All the other that should be clear. All of the other virtual machine software, like Virt-Manager. Virt-Manager is the only one. Like VirtualBox and like VMware do this too. So it's about what you'd expect. But that's pretty much Virt-Manager in a nutshell. Like that's, at least as a desktop user, that's what I would recommend doing, right? VirtualBox on Linux is super jank. If you're using Debian, it's even more jank, right? It's awful. Like if you're using VMware, it's not as bad, but like it's still pretty bad. Like, and you also have to pay up money. I mean, I know they have to make their money, but like, come on, it's VMware. They use Macs, they don't use anything else. But this is why Virt-Manager is so cool. You can just use this to what you can do with a computer essentially becomes boundless once you understand what you can do through a virtual machine. And that's what makes this so special, right? So if you want to, and again, to your point, right? If you want to replace a snapshot, you can just throw them away, right? So if you click on this little trash can icon here, this actually deletes the snapshot. So that's how you do it. But that's Virt-Manager, right? It's really, once you get set up, it's, especially if you're on Debian distros, it's super duper easy. Like, because Debian sets up everything for you, right? Once Debian and Ubuntu will set this up for you, and it will work great. Like once, and then, yeah, you might have to do some little extra tweaks here and there if you're running like anything other than like a Debian based distro, but for the most part it works pretty well. And I strongly recommend trying to learning how to at least use Virt-Manager to a basic degree, right? This is the first YouTube video run by YouTube comments. Leave a comment down below on what you want to do with your virtual machine, and click the like button so that VMware can kiss my butt. All right.
And Parallels.
And Oracle. Catch you later, and we'll see you nerds next week.